Hi, what are the things that scare you? What are the things that keep you up at night? Do you ever struggle with anxiety? Personally, I don't like to be afraid. I don't like scary movies. My wife and my sister love scary movies. I let them go together. I prefer to get my adrenaline rush from other less terrifying ways. And this is probably why I will never jump out of an airplane and I will never dive off of a cliff. There's absolutely nothing appealing to me about those activities at all. But then again, a lot of people would be terrified doing what I do on a weekly basis, standing before a crowd and speaking. So I guess we all have those things that terrify us. So here's the question. Was Jesus ever afraid? Was Jesus ever anxious about anything? I think he was. And I'm going to tell you why I think he was. And then I'm going to tell you how he dealt with his fears and his anxiety. And in watching and listening to Jesus, we can learn how to deal with our fear and our anxiety when they hit us. Hi, I'm Orozco, and welcome to my channel. This is a place where we think out loud about the Bible and how its teachings have an impact on our lives. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, then be sure to hit the subscribe button and keep checking back. Okay, I know that some of you disagree with my premise that Jesus experienced both fear and anxiety, or maybe the thought of that makes you a little bit uncomfortable and you're not even sure why. So let me begin by briefly explaining what I mean when I say that Jesus experienced both fear and anxiety, and then we'll take a look at how he dealt with it. So you may be thinking, well, Jesus was the divine Son of God. Jesus knew the future. How could he be anxious about it? Jesus had a perfect relationship with God, the Father. So how could he have been afraid or anxious? Now, the Bible does say all those things about Jesus, and I believe all those to be true. But the Bible also tells us that Jesus was human. In fact, the writer of Hebrews tells us that Jesus experienced everything that we experience, even temptation, but was without sin. So here's the important question. Is it a sin to feel afraid? Is it a sin to feel anxious? Because if it's not a sin to feel fear or anxiety, then the Bible says Jesus could have felt it or would have felt it. He felt everything we felt. Remember, he felt everything that we felt except for sin. And my contention is that experiencing fear and anxiety is not sinful. It's not a sin. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're saying, well, wait a minute. God says repeatedly, do not be afraid. Do not fear. And Paul says, do not be anxious about anything. And Jesus himself said, do not worry about your life. In fact, in both those verses, the verse where Paul says, do not be anxious about anything, and the verse where Jesus says, do not worry about your life, it uses the same Greek word. One time translated anxious, the other time translated worry. It's the Greek word marinao, and it means to seek to promote one's own interest. You see, in both cases, it's not describing a feeling of emotions like fear or anxiety. It's describing a mindset. Jesus is saying, don't have the mindset of worry. Don't have the mindset of anxiety. So let's get some definitions straight. Let's define all three of those words from a biblical perspective. So let's start with fear. Fear is a normal human emotion that is a response to a perceived threat. In fact, fear is one of the most basic human emotions we can ever experience. It's programmed into our nervous system and works like an instinct. From the time we're infants, we are equipped with this survival instinct that we need to respond with fear when there is a sense of danger or when we feel unsafe. In other words, fear helps protect us. It's a good thing. And what about anxiety? Anxiety is a little bit more of a mixed bag. Anxiety is the feelings of fear and dread and maybe uneasiness that can occur as a reaction to stress. Now, anxiety also, like fear, can be normal in stressful situations, such as public speaking or taking an important test. In fact, anxiety can actually help us perform even better. Anxiety becomes something bad when those anxious feelings become excessive, all-consuming, and they start to interfere with your day-to-day life. That's when anxiety goes from being just a feeling to being a mindset. And I think it's that mindset of anxiety, that mindset of fear that Jesus and Paul call worry. So that's another biblical word, the word worry. And worry, I think, is fear and anxiety gone bad. When fear and anxiety become excessive and all-consuming, then we're consumed with worry. I think that's especially true when those feelings of anxiety and fear are triggered by past events, something that's already happened and you can't do anything about it, or some kind of irrational concern about the future. Then that's when fear and anxiety become worry. There's also a difference between worry and concern. You see, we're dealing with shades of meaning here. Jesus from the cross asked one of his disciples to take care of his mother. Both of them were there standing at the foot of the cross. Was he worried about her? No. But obviously he was concerned. Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked. So let's say you give me that. Say, okay, Ellis, I get it. Fear and anxiety are not a sin. They are normal and sometimes even helpful emotions that only go bad when they become excessive, like most emotions. Okay, fine. But Jesus knew the future. Jesus knew what was going to happen. He knew his Father was in control. So why would he be fearful and anxious at all? Well, he would be fearful and anxious because he knew the future. Because he knew the future. Anxiety and fear are not simply tied to uncertainty. A lot of times they are, but not just that. If I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that something bad is going to happen to me tomorrow, I'm going to have a hard time sleeping. Any human being would. You're going to be a little fearful and anxious of that thing that you know is coming. And Jesus was a human being. He wasn't 50% divine and 50% human. He was 100% human and 100% divine. So I hope that you would at least consider the idea that Jesus could have experienced fear and anxiety, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing sinful about that. So let's take a look at Jesus then. Was he ever afraid? Did he ever deal with anxiety? What does the Bible say? As it turns out, the scripture indicates that the answer is yes, several times. But the most obvious moment that Jesus was nervous or fearful was the night before his crucifixion. He knew they were going to capture him. He knew they were going to crucify him. Jesus knew what crucifixion looked like. He knew what was waiting for him on that Friday. He knew what he was facing. And he was not afraid of the unknown. He was afraid of what he knew was going to happen. He was anxious about what he knew was going to happen. So he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane that night. The Garden of Gethsemane is located on the Mount of Olives on the eastern side of Jerusalem, just outside the walls. It overlooks the city of Jerusalem. And if you look at what happened there, you will discover some things about how to deal with overwhelming fear and anxiety. So Jesus brings his disciples with him to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he asks them to pray and watch for him. He tells them why he needs their help. In Mark chapter 13, verse 34, it says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," Jesus said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Now that word, overwhelmed with sorrow, in the Greek is just one word. It's a Greek word, but it's made of two Greek words. The word peri, which means surround or around, like perimeter, peri, around, and the word lupe, which can mean sorrow or pain or grief or even frustration, annoyance. So you put these two words together, peri and lupe, per lupe, and it means surrounded by, or you can picture trapped or encompassed by, sorrow, pain, grief, frustration, annoyance. It's a description of fear and anxiety. So what does Jesus do with this? What does he do with his concern? What does he do with his fear? What does he do with his anxiety? In a word, he reflects on it. He goes to the safest place he can find, the Garden of Gethsemane, and he reflects on his fear, on his pain, on his sorrow. Best-selling author Ray Dalio has said that pain plus reflection equals progress. Pain by itself can be overwhelming. Pain can be isolating. But pain plus reflection equals progress. That's an important formula. That's a big idea. So here's the first thing I want you to see Jesus doing. Jesus makes a strategic retreat to a safe place. He makes a strategic retreat to a safe place so that he can reflect. So the Garden of Gethsemane was located on the Mount of Olives, as I said before, just outside the walls of Jerusalem. And Jesus goes there because he needs time to think. He needs a few more minutes with the Father. He knows that they're coming after him, but he needed to be sure that he was doing the right thing. Now, the Garden of Gethsemane was called Gethsemane, which means oil press. There was most likely a stone slab in the middle of the garden somewhere that was used as a community oil press. The Bible loves irony. That night, it was Jesus who was being pressed, you see. He was being squeezed by his fears, sweat pouring down his face, Luke tells us, like blood coming from a head wound. Jesus was scared out of his mind. Any human would be. And please understand, this isn't a way of running away from your problems. The key word here is strategic. He makes a strategic retreat. You need a safe place where you can make a strategic retreat to reflect on your pain, to reflect on your sorrow, to reflect on your fear and your anxiety. So let's look at both aspects of that. So the first aspect is, what does Jesus do to create this safe place? And then once he has created the safe place, what does he do in the safe place? So first, what does he do to create the safe place? Well, he goes to a familiar place. That's what he does. John tells us that the garden was Jesus' favorite place to be whenever he was in Jerusalem. That's why Judas had no problem finding him there. Judas knew exactly where Jesus would be in that moment. He would go back to his favorite spot, to his most familiar place, to his safe place. Listen, the older I get, the more I realize that there's nothing more comforting than arriving home. After a long and stressful trip, nothing better than getting home, right? I mean, vacations are nice, but they cannot replace that familiar recliner or that bed that you've slept in for 20 years. There's nothing like the warmth and the familiarity of home. That's what the Garden of Gethsemane was for Jesus. The garden was familiar. It was comforting. It was a safe place for Jesus at that moment he needed it the most. Jesus retreated to his favorite spot at his most fearful moment. But the second thing I want you to see is that he goes to a beautiful place. It was an olive grove. Trees, flowers, leaves, the smells. It was all very soothing. I've been to the Mount of Olives. I've sat in the location where we think the garden was located, and it's an incredibly soothing place. It's an incredibly calming place. Away from the hustle and bustle of the city of Jerusalem, Jesus goes to this beautiful, beautiful place. It's quiet, muted earth tones all around you, the smells of the flowers and the trees. You need to create that place for yourself. That place you can go in times of anxiety that for you is a beautiful place. As you create this beautiful, safe place, consider three things. Consider the sights. Surround yourself with beauty, whether it's a painting or nature or your favorite picture. Surround yourself with beauty. Consider sounds, soothing music, soothing things, the sounds that soothe you, that are not distracting to you. And then consider the smells. Make them pleasant smells. This is the way you create this beautiful, safe place for yourself. So he goes to a familiar place. He goes to a beautiful place. And then he surrounds himself with trusted friends. This is the third thing he does to create this safe place. And actually, Jesus created 3 rings of protection that night. The first ring of protection was the Mount of Olives itself. It was geography. The geography protected him. The Mount of Olives rises above the Kidron Valley, overlooking Jerusalem. It's high up and you can see everything from there. You can hide in the garden, but from there you can see anything that is coming. The geography itself was a layer of protection. The second ring of protection were his disciples. He took his disciples with him. He told them, watch and pray. And then Jesus formed a third ring of protection. He takes his 3 closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, further into the garden with him. And he tells them, watch and pray. And then Jesus goes further alone and throws himself on the ground to plead with God. But he had created first these 3 rings of protection to create this safe place for himself. What are your rings of protection as you create this safe place for yourself? So Jesus has created this safe place. Now, the second question, what does he do in that safe place? Well, the first thing he does is he confronts his fear by naming it. Jesus was realistic about his situation. He knew he had come from God and he knew that he was returning to God. He knew that his fears were justified. He knew that they were normal. He wasn't afraid to admit it. He said to his disciples, I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. He's saying to them, I need your help. He didn't run to the garden to escape his fears. He went there to confront his fears, to name his fears. He called it by name. He says in Matthew chapter 26, verse 39, he says, may this cup be taken from me. This is his plead with God. This is the thing Jesus wanted most in that moment, to escape the cross. May this cup be taken from me. The cup was the cross. Jesus didn't want to go through the horrible torture of the pain of the cross. He named his fear. When you pull the monster out of the closet, you discover that it's never as ugly or as scary as you thought. It never is. Here's the thing. The very next thing Jesus is going to do in the garden is to let go of his fear. But you cannot let go of your fear until you have named it. You have to name it first. Then you can let go of it. And that's what Jesus does. He lets go of his fear. Mark chapter 14, verse 36 reports Jesus' prayer to God in that moment. And it says this, Abba, Father, he said, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will. So what is it that you need to let go of? We have 60 to 80,000 thoughts per day. Can you imagine that? 60 to 80,000 thoughts every day. Now, these thoughts are not only repetitive, they're also often negative. So you need to find the triggers that create these thoughts and then trace those triggers back to the root cause. If some root cause is plaguing you, then you try to change the way you're looking at that root cause. the way you're looking at it. Once you've named it, then you need to reframe it. Best-selling author Wayne Dyer says that when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. That's another important idea. When we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. So what happens is this critical shift in your brain that really takes the fear and the anxiety from the amygdala, the part of your brain that deals with instinct and emotion, and it shifts that thing to the prefrontal cortex, the place where your brain deals with logic and critical thinking. And that's a very important shift, to take it away from the emotions part of your brain to the critical thinking part of your brain. The best way to do that, to make that shift, is to reframe the anxiety or fear. Simon Sinek, in one of his speeches, talks about how Olympic athletes are able to do this, or premier athletes. And he talks about how he noticed in interviews with these premier athletes who are about to go into a race, the reporters interview them before the big race. And inevitably, the reporter will ask the question, "Are you nervous?" And he began to notice time after time the same response from these premier Olympic athletes. And it was, "No, I'm not nervous at all. I'm excited." And Simon Sinek thought that's brilliant. This move, just in those words, from nervous to excited. And if you think about it, what are the symptoms of both nervousness and excitement? They're the same. Butterflies in your stomach, sweaty palms, a little bit of a jittery in your body. These are all signs both of being nervous, but also signs of being excited. And these Olympic premier athletes decide to look at it, to reframe it, not as nervousness, but as excitement. And that makes all the difference in the world. Jay Shetty, in his book, Think Like a Monk, gives us 4 ways to kind of reframe things in our minds. 4 ways to let go of it. So he uses the acronym TIME, T-I-M-E. And the T stands for thankfulness. Thankfulness has a way of grounding us to the here and now. Start a thankfulness journal, or at least every day write down something in the morning you're thankful for and something in the evening you're thankful for. Be sure to create a spirit of thankfulness. The second is inspiration. I is for inspiration. For a lot of people, it's music, but you want to do something that inspires you, something that lifts you up, something that gets you going, especially first thing in the morning. Don't start your morning with the bad news. Don't start your morning with the problems. You're going to get to those things. You're not running away from them. You're going to go to work and face your problems. You're going to open up the app on your phone and look at all the bad news that's in the world. But don't start with that. Start your morning with something inspirational. Maybe it's music. When I'm studying or writing, it's Chopin or Rachmaninoff. When I'm stressed out, I get in my car, I drive down the freeway listening to the Eagles or Pink Floyd or Queen. I know I'm showing my age. By the way, when you do that, don't close your eyes and stay under the speed limit. But whatever it is for you, maybe it's not music for you. Maybe you like movies or videos or you like to read. Maybe it's some inspirational story or some inspirational quote that you want to start your day with. Or maybe it's just watching a video of, Rocky doing his exercises and the music playing. Whatever it is that gets your adrenaline going and that gets you inspired, start your day with that. So T is for thankfulness, I is for inspiration, and M is for meditation. If you've been listening to me for very long, you knew I was going to get here. Meditation is so important. For one thing, it teaches you how to breathe. It's important to breathe. Meditation gives you the space to breathe. And you might be saying, Ellis, I know how to breathe. Well, yeah, there's an aspect to breathing that is absolutely instinct and automatic. Thank God he put that in us. We don't have to think about breathing. But there is a way to learn how to breathe in a way that is soothing, that calms you down. According to Teresa Borchard, who is associate editor of Psych Central and the author of The Pocket Therapist, she says that deep breathing stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for everything that happens to your body when you're at rest. It's the opposite of your sympathetic nervous system, which basically stimulates your body's fight or flight experience. It deals with the instinct. So if you can tap into that parasympathetic system, the way breathing does, then you can actually calm your body down. Breathing is the only instinctive mechanism in our body that can actually be controlled. So meditation is important. T is for thankfulness, I inspiration, M for meditation, and the E is for exercise. Jesus walks up the Mount of Olives. I've made that walk. I was out of breath by the time I got to the top. Now, that's because I'm out of shape. Jesus was not out of shape, but it's exercise. It's a little bit of a walk. It's not easy to get up there. So don't miss the fact that when things got hairy for Jesus, when things got difficult for him, when the fear and the stress were coming down on him, Jesus took a walk, and that was a regular habit for him, by the way. When the Pharisees were pressing in on him, he climbed a mountain. When the crowds were wearing him out, he sailed across the lake. When life got too crazy, he took a journey to a foreign land to get away from everything, walking about 100 miles over mountains and across rivers to do so. You get the point. When trouble hit, Jesus got physical. Exercise and other physical activity produce endorphins, chemicals in the brain that act as natural painkillers. And also they improve the ability to sleep, which in turn reduces stress. So you see, exercise is this great flywheel that the more you do it, it just has all kinds of benefits, and those benefits grow exponentially. So there it is, the acronym TIME, T-I-M-E. Take that, use it. This will help you let go of the things that you're dealing with. So Jesus names his fear. He confronts his fear. He lets go of his fear, and then he takes action. At some point, Jesus knew that it was time to stop praying and start doing. He saw the approaching torchlights of the posse coming for him, and he said to his disciples, "Come on, let's go. It's time to make it happen." There is a time to get it all out. There's a time to plead with God, to fret and worry and plead with God. Those are all natural things. To really give it to God, let him know what you want. Don't feel bad about that. Allow yourself that time. It's healthy. But set a limit. At some point, it's time to stop crying and stop pleading and to get on with your life. It's time to wipe away the tears, roll up your sleeves, and get to work. That's exactly what Jesus did. And what he does in doing that, something that's just super important, is that he refocuses on his life purpose. Luke, in his gospel, describes this moment like this. In Luke chapter 22, verses 42 and 43, Jesus said, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. I don't think it's a coincidence that when Jesus prayed, "Not my will, but your will be done," that God sent his angels to give Jesus strength. And God will do the same for you. Listen, it's not a sin to feel afraid or anxious. It's a part of the human condition. Fear and anxiety are normal human emotions, sometimes actually helpful human emotions. However, being overcome by fear, overcome by anxiety, so that your fear and anxiety become a day-to-day mindset, is not God's ideal for you. So watch Jesus. See what he did. And try to do those things in your life as well. I pray that God will bless you. I hope that this was helpful. If you can, put in the comment section, let me know what was your biggest takeaway from the way Jesus dealt with his fears? What was your biggest takeaway from the way Jesus dealt with his anxiety? Leave a comment, let me know, and God bless you until we see you again.